Hello and welcome back to another episode of Math with Stone. Today we are going to be using the tic-tac-toe method to solve special cases with factoring. So a special case with factoring is most of the time looked at as if it is missing the middle term or if it is missing the last term. So here we are missing the middle term on the one on the left, and here we're missing the last term on the one on the right. Both of which can be solved with the tic-tac-toe method, and both of which can be solved without it as well. So I want to prove that you can use the tic-tac-toe method to do this, but I also want to show you the tricks as well. If you want to remember the tricks, you can. Here, because there was no middle, the middle term is 0x. It's not written. That would be where we have this. And you need to think of a number that will multiply to equal negative 16, but will add up to 0. And if that's the case, the numbers have to be the same. And if the numbers have to be the same, it's not going to be 1 and 16 or 2 and 8. It would have to be 4 and 4. So this is going to be a 4 and a negative 4 to be able to multiply to negative 16. But more importantly, 4 and negative 4 add to 0. X and x, 4 and negative 4. Your two factors are x plus 4 and x minus 4, which you may already see the trick here. If there is no missing, or if there is a missing middle term, it's going to be what multiplies to 16 or the square root of 16, because it's got to be the same number, one positive, one negative. You're donezo. All right. What about this one? This one, there's not really a trick, except you have to be able to visually see that both of these do have an x. And if you have that vision, then you're going to be able to use greatest common factor, which I got another video, but I will show you how to do it here too. But this still works with the tic-tac-toe board. Still works if you don't have that vision, because greatest common factor requires a little bit of like, look at it and realize, oh, these both have an x. I could take that out. Tic-tac-toe, not as much thinking. But it is missing the last term. That last term is a 0. So first term, last term, middle term in the box. X squared times 0 is 0x squared. And what multiplies to 0 but adds to negative 3? Well, anything can multiply to 0 as long as one of them is 0. And the other one, if we wanted to add the 3, would have to be a negative 3 to be able to multiply to 0 and add up to negative 3x. So there you go. It's just funky. X times, the greatest common factor between both of these is x. And x times x is x squared. X times negative 3 is negative 3x. And x times 0 is 0x. 3 times 0 is still 0. So these factors are x plus 0 and x minus 3. Which you don't need to write x plus 0. You could just write x, which proves my original point that I said I would do. If you recognize that both of these have an x, you can factor out an x and then remove an x and remove an x to get x minus 3 and accomplish the same exact task really quickly. But that requires some intuition, just like this one required some intuition as well. Okay? So the next one we're going to be doing is going to be the slightly harder versions of these, but not really at all. And we're going to solve while we're at it. So let's say we had 4x squared minus 25 is equal to 0. And we wanted to solve via factoring. You could use the tic-tac-toe method and do 4x squared. We're missing the middle term. So this would be 0x and this would be negative 25. And that would be negative 100. 4 times 25 is 100. So what multiplies to 100 but adds to 0? That's 10 and negative 10. And because this is a 4, 4 doesn't really go into 10. But I know that 2 and 2 also can multiply to 4. And I know that 2 and can go into both 10 and 4, which is what you're looking for, the greatest common factor. What numbers can both 4 and like 10 be divided by, and that's 2. And then this would be negative 5, and this would be positive 5. And we end up with our two scenarios here where we got 2x plus 5 and 2x minus 5, which you may recognize as the square root of 25 and the square root of 4. Now, this special case will only work when there is a missing term and both these numbers are square rootable, but more importantly, it has to be a negative in between. Because if it's a positive in between, you would not be able to actually add to 0, because remember, this has to be positive and negative to add to 0. Well, if the bottom number that you're multiplying to is positive because this was a plus sign, it's flat out not factorable. This has to be, right here, has to be negative. It cannot work if it is positive. All right, next one. Let's say we got negative 2x squared minus, we'll do plus 8x. Okay, so for here, again, you could use like just greatest common factor method, but I'm proving the tic-tac-toe method works in almost every scenario. First term, don't have a last term, that's a 0. And therefore, we put our middle term up in the box. What multiplies to negative 2x squared, but adds to 8? Well, let's see here. I made a mistake. 2 times 0 is 0. Oops, negative 0 if you want, but that's still 0. What multiplies to 0, but adds to 8? 8, of course, and 0. X and x to make sure it adds to 8x. And multiplies to x squared. Where does negative 2 belong? Well, you can put the 2 has to go with the 8, most likely. Like that would make the most sense. But what about where does the negative go? And normally you should put it with the greatest common factor, but with the negatives, it really doesn't matter. You just have to express that one of them has to be negative. You get to pick. So if the leading coefficient is negative, one of these has to be negative. It doesn't actually matter which one. And the 2 in this case could go with 8, but technically 2 and 0 could have belonged together as well. 2 times, not a 4, but a negative 4 makes positive 8. If you put the negative here, then this would have been a positive 4. It all works out. It's just like the negative has to be on something, and where you put it will determine some of the other features, but it will all work out in the long run. X times 0 is 0x. Negative 4 times 0 is 0. So we essentially have negative 2x, crisscross, plus 0, and x minus 4, which could be negative 2x and then x minus 4. Which, if you looked at this from the very beginning, you could have saved a ton of time by always, before factoring, checking for greatest common factors. What can both of these divide by? That would be a negative 2. What do both of these have in common? At least an x. And if you divide them both by negative 2, x, and you divide this by negative 2, you get 1. Negative 2 divided by negative 2 is 1. And if you take away an x, you get an x left over. Negative 2, taking away from the 8, dividing it by the 8, you get negative 4. And if you took away an x, you don't have any more, which you may notice these are the exact same answers. So greatest common factor is a lot quicker, but it requires a little bit of a different skill set. All right, till next time, stay positive. We are almost done with factoring, but I will see everybody later. Bye.